Before the chaos, before the fire, there was silence. A silence so deep, it felt like the world was holding its breath. It was 1939. Across Europe, ordinary people lived ordinary lives. Children laughed on their way to school, shopkeepers arranged their goods, soldiers marched in routine drills. But behind every smile was a quiet tension, a fear no one could name. Something was coming, something dark. Germany was still bleeding from the last war, humiliated, angry, desperate. People looked for hope, and they found a man who promised everything. Adolf Hitler, a single voice that rose from the ruins and convinced a broken nation that glory could be theirs again. He spoke of strength. He spoke of power, but inside his mind lived a vision of domination. Germany rebuilt its armies. Italy stood at its side. Japan sharpened its ambitions in the Pacific. The world watched, uncertain, praying that peace would survive. But peace had already died. On the morning of September 1, 1939, the sky over Poland split open. German tanks thundered across the fields. Bombs screamed downward like metal rain. Families ran, soldiers fought, and the world finally understood, the nightmare had begun again. Britain and France declared war. The earth slipped back into darkness. Countries toppled like fragile walls: Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands. And then, in a shock that echoed around the globe, France fell, in just 6 weeks. Europe trembled. Only Britain remained. And when night came, German bombers filled the sky. Cities turned to fire. But the British held their ground. They did not break. Far to the east, Hitler made a decision that would change everything. He invaded the Soviet Union, a land of ice, vastness, and unforgiving winters. Millions marched into the cold, believing victory was certain. Meanwhile, across the ocean, another disaster unfolded. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. Explosions ripped through battleships, flames danced across the water, and smoke covered the sky. America woke up, and the war became truly global. Slowly, painfully, the tide began to turn. In the ruins of Stalingrad, men fought for shattered buildings, broken streets, tiny pieces of land, every inch bought with blood. Winter crushed them all, but the Soviet defenders refused to fall. And there, in that frozen hell, Hitler's unstoppable empire began to crumble. In the West, the Allies prepared a daring move. June 6, 1944, D-Day. Thousands of soldiers stepped into the cold surf of Normandy. Bullets tore the air, waves carried the wounded away. But they pushed forward, and because of them, Europe found its hope again. But the war held horrors beyond the battlefield. Millions of innocent people, children, families, the elderly, were taken to camps where suffering had no limits. The Holocaust carved one of the deepest scars in human history, a wound the world can never forget. By 1945, Germany was collapsing. Berlin burned. In an underground bunker, Hitler ended his life. And with that, the war in Europe was nearly over. But in the Pacific, Japan continued to fight. Cities were in ruins, soldiers exhausted, yet the battle raged on. To end the suffering, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs, one on Hiroshima, the other on Nagasaki. The world fell silent once more. Japan surrendered. After 6 long years, the war was finally over. When the smoke cleared, nothing looked the same. Cities were ashes, families broken forever, more than 70 million lives were gone. But from this unimaginable pain, the world made a promise: never again. Nations united to build a future where such darkness could never return. The United Nations was born. A new world began. World War II was not just a war. It was a story of courage and cruelty, of hope and horror, of humanity at its worst, and sometimes, at its best. A story that shaped our world forever. A story we must never forget.